Before we start, just checking if all the teams are here. Opening government, are you guys in the call?
OG is here.
Okay, opening opposition.
In opposition, he's here.
Closing government.
Here.
Closing opposition.
Here.
Okay, so I'll just check the panel. Amrit, are you here? Mehraj? Nkosilathi? And Taku. Okay, great. So everyone is here. So we are good to start. Just give me a second. Okay, Amrit, do you mind keeping time on the chat space? Amrit? Or any panelist that wants to keep time on the chat?
Sir, actually, I was connecting via my other device. My device just ran out of power. Just give me a minute and then maybe I can.
Okay, no worries. Mehraj, do you want to help out with the timer on the chat? Just using like
Sure.
the chat.
Sure, I can do that.
Great, thank you so much. So we're gonna wait for Amrit, and then we can start. Amrit, let me know when you're back.
Right, sir, this is Amrit. I'm here now.
Okay, great. Prime Minister, when you're ready, we can start.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So I'll be taking POIs in the text space. If you have a POI, please ask in the text space. I'll be taking closing opposition early into my speech. All right. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are a few things I would need to clarify for the sake of this debate, because this is this house belief motion, which means it's a value truth-based debate. I don't think there's any burden on any gov team to prove how much we are going to be giving these people, what exactly it's going to look like. Or just for us to have a fair debate, I think the framing here would look like the stipend that we are going to be giving them could come in monthly or weekly, right? The idea is that it's probably going to be similar to long-term disability centers, but because we agree that there is an amount of money that even exists in opposition's word, that is, there is an amount of money that is channeled into these state-owned disability services, we think that's the exact amount of money we are probably going to try to redistribute. There's going to exist a database of these persons, and we probably have access to the accounts to send these stipends directly to them so that they can decide what exactly they want to use it for, how exactly they intend to use it, and all those type of things, right? But secondly, because the debate says government should provide these persons with this type of things. I think it's important to interrogate what exactly these state-owned disability services look like and most of the functions that they perform in opposition's world, right? So they do things like financial assistance programs, for example, where governments offer financial aid or disability benefits to help these people cover living expenses like medical costs and other essential needs. We think they also do things like healthcare services, right? Where state-owned disability services often include things like access to healthcare facilities, rehabilitation programs, and medical professionals to address the specific health needs of individuals with disabilities. It basically looks like having a building for these people specifically where they can go on to carry their activities. I think a perfect example of what these things, like what state-owned disability services look like, is when you look at places like the Department of Social Services in the United States, for example, or the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia, or the Department of Work and Pensions in the United Kingdom. We think what these services essentially do is to try to cater for the needs of people that live with disabilities. Let's go into our argument proper. The first thing I'm going to prove is that when it comes to what is the best way to go, right? The idea of using state to act as a paternal figure for these individuals to create any form or to make decision on what is best for them. Why is this true? Two things. One, because government cannot rationalize the proximate feelings of these individuals, which form the basis of the decision-making pattern. This is important because even though it makes sense that government can, to an aggregate, decide to sieve out what is best for them, I think this decision is usually based off interrogating what is best for person A, what is best for person B, what is best for person C, and you aggregate to find what is generally best for all of them, and you try to do this. I think that's what most of those services do. But generally, paternalism in and of itself has this particular feature. The second reason why paternalism can be a very wrong way to go about when trying to cater for what is best for people is that government, in the vast majority of instances, have little to no information on what is best for these individuals individually. What government assumes is because you are disabled, we know that your specific needs probably is you don't have access, you can't work because of all these things. What this means is that giving them money on our side, giving them stipend, which will obviously be significant, will give them the ability to make choices based off their subjective experience in and of themselves. This in and of itself counteracts any argument about, oh, government probably would always want to know what is best and try to do things that are better for these people in specific way. Closing opposition shoot.
So what's the principal extent of your case, right? Would you, for instance, remove homeless shelters and instead give homeless people stipends?
Great. Opening position shoot.
The responsibility of the government, is it contingent on the ability to be exchanged for over money or provision of state facility?
Great. So first, let's respond to closing opposition. I think the principal consistency or the principal claim here is that we agree that there are a certain number of these persons that probably themselves, because the only way that POI makes sense is that all disabled people are homeless people, which we don't think in the vast majority of instances is that way. I think what these state-owned disability service facilities look like is like where we give shelters to people that probably do not have homes in that particular instance. What we can do on our ward is to push these people into different like housing sectors within the states, but where states knows that giving them money can probably cater for them. I don't think it's fair that we probably look at debate only from the sense of homeless people that are disabled. So that POI can either have little to no impact. In opening opposition's response, I think it's fair to say state has an obligation to know what is best for its people, right? And that's why state tries to make better health care or improve the infrastructures within the state for all those persons. The idea is for these people that are living with disabilities, the obligation state has to them is to ensure that things are better for them and their needs are met specifically. The only way that can happen is when state gives them direct stipend to be able to cater for. Like I said, this is going to be in the same capacity as the amount of what is amount of money that is probably invested in state-owned disability service in of themselves. I think we just have to prove that in developing countries or are easily cut off in terms of funding service centers because they do not represent a crucial political bloc that the state usually wants to care for. But even if the state also has them at hand to care for them in that way, I think the bureaucracy that's probably involved within those particular sectors does not necessarily mean that they have access in the way opposition teams would want you to believe. The type of access they have could probably be limited because of the extent to which bureaucracy works within that particular framework. But lastly, I think it's just cool that we understand that this debate would only make sense when it happens in first world countries where they have the capacity to fund these things. So we don't have arguments about government not having the capacity to do this in the vast majority of instances. Paternalism might have a good intent, but it can be a wrong way to go when state wants to agree on an aggregate what is best for these people. Proud to propose.
Thanks, PM. LO, when you're ready.
You don't have an institution that is permanently resident for you. So you could move from one private counselor to another, keep on wasting your money. Or secondly, you may think you need that money to build a house that's, if possibly, is that heavy because it's a stipend. You guys can't say it is huge or hefty. All right. So those are things that may happen. Or secondly, maybe your parents need that money too, or your siblings need it for school fees, or your guardian, the one who helps you make your life easier for you, probably also need a bite of that money. That's how come you are not going to unlock that benefit. And that's why sufficiently we unlock that benefit, right? What's the first argument from opposition? We think that you create a void. In status quo, the reason why government has a natural monopoly when it comes to infrastructure is highly profitable. But secondly, because the numbers of persons living with disability in most countries on the comparative to persons who aren't with disabilities is way, way glaring. The disparity is very, very big. Persons without disability are in higher numbers, and so it makes more profitable sense to get into that particular market and not care about physical disabled persons or services. It means that they leave that void without if there will be any particular group of people who will fill that void, which means on numbers, those bigger number of persons with disability who may have parents and so on and so forth, who may want to have their kids go to these things, are going to then lack it because government funding is going to shift, which means in the long term, all these particular facilities are going to deteriorate. Nobody's going to be incentivized to go there because government's priority now is on giving stipend. The way up is very simple. That void can never be filled, which means the award is unable to provide any specific special environment to persons who live with disability in the future to also have equal access to education, equal access to all of those facilities that persons without disability also equally really have. That is problematic and that hurts them. On numbers, do the way up. We think we beat OG, we beat CG. Second extension, value/experience. What stipends do is it's just money. You can't interpret the value in money. You just see money and it's just money. What value does money have? Just the numbers. What is actually going to happen is your guardian is going to use that money, get those funds, because there's nowhere in this motion that says government has the right to tell them what they can use those particular funds for. The reason why they're highly inclined to misuse those funds are 4 reasons. Number one, people pay attention to their immediate biological edges and immediate edges they have in their mind, what they think is more sufficient. So I may give you $100,000 right now, but because you want the best car, that's something that you are highly inclined to do because it's more approximate to you and it can give you an immediate happiness right now. Before, let me take OG. Desires, right? And waste those monies off by virtue of the analysis I give to you because people want something they can just take and be happier right now, right? But secondly, they have guardians. These guys are not Jesus Christ for Christ's love. These guys can really mess these guys up because they probably think, well, that's the benefit they get for having a kid who has disability. They probably think they have an ownership to that particular fund because they're the parents and the kids are an extension of them. Kids may never even have a role in how this money is actually really used. They can be wasted off. On the comparative on our side, you have that particular service there built and it's consistently there permanently, and more investment keeps on going in there and expansion happening, and you be able to go there and socialize with fellow persons with disability and even with persons without disability because of your teachers, your counselors who can tell you how the world really looks, right? The third analysis is on the labor market. When you are physically disabled, the metric for you to break into the labor market is very, very high, which means you need government services like education and all of those other rehabilitation and sports facilities to justify why you must exist in the labor market. At a point where you, the person with disability, have a huge barrier, it's problematic for government to take away that particular need that you need to unlock your ability to fight into the labor market, right? This is how we beat OG and CG. One, we've told you how likelihood of stipends going into unlocking a benefit is rare. Secondly, we've showed you how value and experience is essentially happening in our world. And thirdly, on labor market, we are proud to oppose.
Thanks, LO. GPM, when you're ready.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I'll start version. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Okay, I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, life is hard when you are disabled. Not because you cannot do things, but it's hard for you because of how the abled people around you treat you and try to limit you. The existence of state structures that exist primarily to try to help less fortunate people in and of themselves in how they operate is a contributing factor to how these people are being treated wrongly day in and day out. Example, disabled people and homeless people in today's debate, however, like CEO was trying to ask, have to live their lives being treated as a consequence. Literally everybody else around them tends to treat them differently. We say from side opening governments that the only way that you can help restore the littlest amount of human dignity that these people have left to give them state money. I'm gonna proceed from this and show you basically why the best case of opt-ins, which is to defend status quo, is an insult.
Okay, can you pause the timer if you can?
States how is
Okay.
people and people living with disabilities. It's about
Sorry.
time that we corrected that.
DPM, DPM, your network
Yeah.
is choppy, so I would rather suggest you leave and come back, so like we don't have like issues at the run course.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Good.
Mascot, can you reach your partner? I think like it's over a minute now.
Yeah, I'm doing that. He's trying to join back. He'll be here soon.
Is it perfect?
We can hear you, but it's not perfect. So can you put your phone like on airplane mode for like 15 seconds and then turn it back on?
Okay, so I actually did the airplane mode thingy right now, and I'm using the phone, but hold on, let me try reading the motion and then confirm if you can hear me over a few sentences. So the motions is this house believes that people living with disabilities a direct stipend rather than state-owned disability services.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay, great.
So we're just going
Let me
to the
just
idea of like
now let me restart. Let me just restart.
no, you just have to proceed. Like you've done 1 minute, so you can't restart. So just
Okay, so you're
continue.
good. You got the intro and everything.
Yes, so you were just starting to say defending the status quo is an insult to human dignity. That's the last thing we heard from you.
Perfect. Yeah, that's fine. Let me just reset this. Okay. Hold on. Cool. So I'm gonna continue in 3, 2, 1. 4 reasons why status quo perpetuates an insult to the dignity of disabled people that use state infrastructure. 4 reasons. The first one is that these people live in places where they give them rules and restrictions as to literally the time that you have to wake up, the time that you have to go to bed, the time you have to go to the doctor's room for your appointment, for the doctor to look at your bad knee, or for the doctor to look at your eye, or for the doctor to look at your amputated arm. The second reason is that they literally have to share facilities with everybody that raises concerns. So, for example, if you're in a state facility that is looking at people that have spinal issues, you have to literally use the same facilities. And if you have somebody that you do not want that person to share that facility with you, you don't have an option because the state thinks they are doing you a favor. The third reason is that there is zero privacy, right? You walk into a shelter or a place for people that can't walk, people that are in wheelchairs, and people that need support from the state because they are disabled, and there is zero privacy because literally everybody is in the next place to each other. They are using the same doctor. They have files all over the place. The fourth reason is that they are treated as a segregated group of people. That literally means that there is a special unit for you that you have to go there only to get the healthcare that you need. And if you go to any mainstream health facility, they're like, I will go to the special health facility for disabled people. That is where they're going to attend to you. We cannot attend to you over here. What does these 4 factors do? These 4 factors signal to the rest of society that these people are subpar and these people are broken eggs and broken shells that need to be treated precariously, because if you don't do this, they are going to break down. That is how come you get all the problems that LO talks to you about. The fact that people don't rate them enough to give them jobs. The fact that jobs on the job market don't even care about making themselves like comfortable enough to accommodate people that are physically disabled, right? Because they think such people are broken shells and they cannot offer anything good. So to answer CO's POI, yes, right? In principle, homeless people should also be given stipends enough for them to afford to buy themselves houses, because the same fucking treatment that they get from government shelters are not good, and that treatment signals to other people that they are subpar people that don't deserve the same kind of dignity. My PM already told you that the debate cannot be about the money from the stipends would not be enough. If the money for the state services on up bench is enough, it will be the same money that you're going to give to these guys to afford the private care that they want to. How do we better protect human dignity for these guys on our side in OG? Why do we believe this? We believe so because it does 3 things. The first one is that it gives them better autonomy. This means that they get the choice and they get to control how they want to go by their recovery, right? What does this mean? This means that they get to say what products they want to use to treat themselves. They get to decide what they want to buy. They get to decide when they want to switch services. So, for example, if you're going for counseling consistently because you have chronic ADHD and you don't like your counselor, the state will tell you this is the best counselor we have. Like the LO says, it's the freaking best. So you know what says we're once provided that you don't have an option. If they give you the money and you don't like the counselor, you can switch that counselor just like any other normal person would do if they are not using a state facility. That means then that they get to decide and express themselves on their own term. What is this? A chance for breaking down the stigma that people have around them. Do you know why? To be optionless, and people don't see them to be passive patients subjected to treatment whenever you want them to. This breaking down of that signaling makes sure that the rest of society can see them in a much better life. How is the second way that we can give these people the human dignity that they want, aside autonomy. The second way is that there is better flexibility and responsiveness for people that are physically challenged. How so? This is because state facilities and state resources do not change enough with time and do not always cater to the best things that you need. This argument is engaging very directly to what the leader of opposition told you. He made an assertion that the state experts in the field of taking care of disabled people. Two responses to this. The first one is that the state doesn't necessarily have the best information and best quality. Do you know why? Because we see this in the health sector and health industry for normal people. There's a reason why when people are going for heart transplants and they want to go for cancer treatment and facility clinics, they don't go to state-owned like places, but they go to like private specialized fertility clinics and all what have you, right? Because the private sector can invest an obscene amount of money to make sure they are specialties, right? But I'll take that POI.
You're not being comparative. Your burden in this debate is not to tell us the way public healthcare is bad. Your burden is to comparatively show us why you are better. So you haven't done any analysis. You've just said, you haven't proven to us why your stipend works, basically.
No. That's literally what I'm doing. It's terrible. So give them the money and they can decide what they want to do with it. Literally what the entire debate is about, right? Opt out with the money that they've been given and afford our bench then about how they want to beat us by saying these people will not treat themselves. At the very treat themselves. We think it is a people got that for anyways. We think they should be treated the same way and you've got to respect their rights. Vote OJ.
Thanks, DPM. Deal when you're ready.
All right, just give me, say, 40 seconds to set up my channel on my screen and gather my notes. Please, can you mute your mic? All right, thank you. Excuse me. All right, so for POI, okay, so I'll be pausing within my speech to ask a POI, particularly from closing government and most likely opening government, but I would make sure I take a POI within my speech. So just get ready and do not waste my time, which means you don't have to unmute. All right, so given that very, very well, that's well clear, I'm just going to be starting my speech. So panel, the biggest clash so far in the opening side of the House. We agree that it is discrimination, but it is justified because it's functional discrimination. Yeah, it's not because they are blind, but because they can't function discrimination in itself. On the comparative to persons who do not. For example, a blind student needs to learn how to use the Braille before learning how to write. You cannot use this approach directly engages what status quo currently looks like, and how does status quo function based on the perception, the perspective that society most likely used to treat this individual, which is one of the first lines that you got from Deputy Prime Minister. We agree that these individuals are most likely deplorable in terms of like the way they most likely treat them. But let me mechanize it to you in proper and to show to you what it directly looks like. The first is that you have a lot of discriminatory approach from within their homes, simply because most of these individuals are inherently seen as burdens. For example, individuals that have to be led how to probably walk or probably how to maybe move from one particular place to the other, or those that cannot necessarily even take care of themselves, probably due to things like nervous breakdown or things concerning hormone dysfunction nature and all those sort of things. Inherently within their homes, these individuals don't even have any sort of like an atmosphere that directly allows them to rise through the ladder, which most likely means even in a world where you create shitload of money into their account, families would only see these things as an opportunity to escape with their most likely fund, because they don't inherently value them. The only value attachment that exists now is the fact that, oh, my blind child or my nervous broken down child has money now, so let me most likely use this person as a meal to most likely make government. All of the impact opening government most likely want to achieve in those sort of instances don't necessarily exist for this sort of individual. But secondly, because the debate also have to be expansive, let's assume that these are disabled individuals that have the ability to most likely make choices in their homes. For example, technically blind people or individuals that cannot most likely walk, but they have all of their rationalities intact. Why do we still think that this particular approach is not good for this set of individuals? The first most important thing here is the opportunity to things like self-actualization that my partner already analyzed to you. Note, every form of direct investment that government makes to individuals based on the sovereignty that exists between government and their people is most likely channeled towards the long-term approach of allowing that particular individuals to rise through the ladder. It most likely means for you to say in opening government that, oh, we give you this money for you to buy the best fine dress. We agree, you can wear that dress in itself, but it is an abysmal usage of government money to use that sort of stipend to be arranging your wardrobe when the existing form of that particular fund is to contribute to your self-actualization as a citizen of that particular state. What the comparative advantage looks like in our side of the house is that whether it is big money or it is small money, but the debate is existing in a world where government have the capacity, like PM and DPM free. When you carry all of the chunk of those particular money and put into this state-provided services center for these particular people, what you do are two things. One, you improve the state of these social services already. The reason why the improvement is important is very, very simple. In status quo, if you have like disabled, if you are like where normal people most likely patronize, they will discriminate you. They most likely like answer the able-bodied people before they most likely prioritize you, or they don't give you any sort of like quality services. This particular fund in itself can be used to create centers that are exclusive for them. So even if it is discrimination in this sort of approach, it is a proper one because it is something that is right within that particular state, and you also have the mandate to demand for a better thing, and not just some handed down stipend that is most likely that may not necessarily like cater for your like efficiency. Mechanization as a self-approach and self-actualization. When you create things like educational institutions, health institutions for this particular set of persons, the exclusive advantage here is that at the completion of those sort of like school programs, for example, if it's a secondary school for disabled individuals or blind individuals, these persons now have things like certificates and constant government recommendation that can most likely open spaces for them within the society. The white belt is simple. Companies not necessarily want to necessarily not want to like employ them, probably because of their state. But given the fact that things like progression and evolution already exist in society, there will most likely be a carve-out niche for them to like be included some way or the other based on the recommendation from government facility. But even if this does not necessarily happen, before the completion of those sort of schools, policy in our side of the house will create things like empowerment scheme for things like entrepreneurship, where these individuals can most likely own businesses at the end of the day. So even if they don't most likely get job, they now have the understanding of what it means to run finances and all that, based on the peculiarity of the services you most likely create for them. This is an impact you don't create in a world where you continuously turn money to them on a monthly basis and you don't get any sort of like approach from their side of the house. Before impact extension, closing government, future POR. Wait, am I audible?
Open government has one.
Okay, cool. Okay,
yeah, it is unclear why a disabled person who cares about themselves will use this type to buy this. In other words, they would likely use to subscribe for personal healthcare and education. Also, it's unclear why
Listen to me, listen. You cannot just rely on words like unclear. The essence of exclusive provision for things like inclusion for job opportunities and all that. I don't know what else you want to most like their pockets. Let's go to state role and state responsibility. The narrative you create in their side of the house is the discriminatory processes towards provision of social welfare. It directly means government have enough excuse for things like exchange of money for primary fulfillment of government obligation. The reason you exist as a government in the first place is not the government for able-bodied people, but a government for everybody, which most likely means the same concerted effort that government make in improving educational institutions, healthcare measure, policy, and all those of things also have to be extended to this sort of individuals in the society. Simple. Why? Because one, their parents constantly pay tax to state. Two, these individuals also use their political power to vote in this government in the first place. We think for their political rights and the mandate that government most likely hold to them, government hold them more than giving them stipends on monthly basis, but particularly fulfilling its roles to make sure that based on the natural state at which they are most likely are, that government particularly create that particular space for fulfillment of government obligation. We don't welcome a world where government escape its accountability measure by not actually fulfilling its obligation. We stand for what is right. Proud opening opposition.
Thanks, Gail, or member of government, when you're ready. Yes, you are audible.
Timer, and then I'll start. Okay. Oh, Bukhosi Mpofu, pronoun he, him, pure eyes on the chat space. I'll keep my eyes on the chat space firmly. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this debate is inherently comparative in the sense of how government ought to act and cater for individuals living with disabilities. Induces a government obligation to act. This is the fundamental basis of our principled argument as closing government, right? Let's use, they ask if we provide services for individuals that are homeless and give them cash, even though they don't have homes. The reason why Cape Town, South Africa, has so many facilities for the homeless, but people don't stay there and instead flood the streets, is because those services don't uniquely cater for their needs. Those individuals, some of them have mental issues, some of them are dealing with addictions, right? How does then, like, let's give them the tie back onto this debate for our principle. We tell you that government actions or government obligation fails on two fronts. Two reasons. One, it's inherently stereotypical, but secondly, we want equitable consideration for these people. What is the tie back for this principle? One thing, we think that when you look at the individuals that sit down and draft policies, these individuals aren't representative of people living with disabilities. That is to say, you don't have people living with disabilities in the finance department. You rarely have them in the decision-making process. That is to say, all of the consideration that happens is from the lens of an able-bodied individuals and their perception of individuals living with disabilities. They are not in the conversation, and that's why ultimately the mechanisms never actually address their direct problems. The principle then is we ought to best cater for these individuals by firstly giving them like empowerment so that they can like best cater to their needs. Because we tell you that governments are likely going to like start up like inherently individuals living with disabilities are different. That is to say, people that are visually impaired have different levels of visual impairments and have different needs, right? Government usually holistically caters for all of them, and that's exactly the problem that we think we identify as closing government. That's the principle. Now, on to the most important section of this debate, forced adoption through aggressive guerrilla mechanization and e-packing. what are our extensions? Firstly, we don't think that the problem in this case, like our opening says, is that the state is paternalistic. We think that the biggest problem is that the state isn't like living with a disability, and the state doesn't adequately cater for these people that we have. But secondly, we think that we need to inherently compare like money and services, and why we think that them physically having a stipend is something that is better. Two things. One, individuals living with with disabilities are the best people to perceive themselves and how they want to assist themselves. We don't think that the state has that form of control over their individual agency. And that's why giving them money is very important, because you give them two things. One, you give them an ability to use that money for things that best cater for them. That is, if they are like learning where they want to work or getting a good education for themselves, or tailoring the healthcare that they need for themselves. We think that that's very important, and that's comparatively better, because recognize the state even fails in its own mandate of trying to cater for these people, right? The services provided by the state inherently are poor quality. That's why we see like shortage of accessibility ramps in public buildings and all of those things. These are directly the reasons why we think that that's problematic, right? Secondly, and our second piece of extension is we think that there's already an inherent length of transparency in how finances are used, specifically when it relates to like services that the state does for individuals living with disability. What does this mean? The state can easily say we funded this amount of money and into disability services, provide poor quality services that are not tailored or cater for direct like money, or like giving these individuals stipends directly makes like the state more accountable, because we are necessarily giving these people a monthly stipend. We think that that's particularly important. But lastly, why do we think this is very important, a very important stance to do? For two reasons. One, we don't think we deliberately stopped investing in like state education. There's already big philanthropy, there's social services, there's scientists that invest these individuals, there's like social justice services that directly cater for half of an alternative that even provides in essence. But what is important is that you do two things in terms of impacting. Firstly, you shift public sector the problem that exists in opening half. Opening half is such a weird idea of individuals living with disabilities, because they are able-bodied people trying to perceive them. That's why they're only talking about the fact that they need they need healthcare. They don't cater to like the specific needs of them. We tell you that the moment you're able to shift the public perception, you're able to influence things like these individuals actually like getting like access to things like jobs, actually getting political power that allows them to get into power and be able to do like the very decisions that the state is like failing to do in terms of providing for them. We think that ultimately you take away the control of the lives that the state has, because recognize most of the potential of the individual individuals living with disabilities is lost simply because of the fact that the state doesn't cater enough, or the state doesn't even do like the bare minimum for them. We think that that's the biggest problem that exists. I'm sorry, you guys are out of time. I wanted to take a POI, right? But ultimately, why do we think our contribution specifically from closing government is something that is important? Two things. One, we think that principally the state is misplaced in the way that it acts and in the way that it drafts policy or allocates funds for individuals living with disability. We tell that the services that they provide aren't likely going to cater for their specific needs, and that's the problem. We tell that the state is even failing to provide quality service, right? Even with the same amount of money. We tell that giving these individuals individual money that they're able to like have autonomy over their use and how like they want to impact their lives is probably the best solution for catering for like individuals living with disability and fulfilling state's obligation. Proud to propose.
Thanks, member of opposition, member of government, when you're ready.
everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So in one of the rounds today, my computer just randomly cut out. So if that does happen, my partner will, tell me, and you guys also just need to audibly say that to me. I'm so sorry if that happens. Also, I can't see the chat at all, so POIs would need to be verbal. I don't think there's anything else, and I am audible. And we heard all of that, so I am good for connection.
Yes, all good.
Okay, cool. Then I am happy to start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, disability rights are best met when we reform the society around us to better accept disabled people. And the only agent that is able to execute that goal is the state. In order to navigate the debates in front of us, what do we get from opening government? They run some kind of line about autonomy. We're going to engage that reasonably, but they actually lose on mechanism. Just because public health care is terrible doesn't automatically mean you get people better taken care of. We think they're actually going to go to the final with us, but we're just simply going to show a case that they're trying to uniquely cater for the needs of these individuals. So they're trying to provide the mechanism that opening government didn't. But the problem with their characterization is that we never actually get from them what these unique needs that need to be catered for are, so that we can see the mechanization play out in their case. So 2 things we need to do to win is that a false narrative of autonomy is not necessarily what always expands happiness, except because any flaw in their mechanism means that their side is completely regrettable. They should never win the debate. The clear comparative, like physical infrastructure, so ramps. Secondly, resources like open mental health talks, sharing circles, public counselors, and you can still have variety in that because clinics have multiple counselors that run different sessions. Sticks people use who have low mobility use to help pull up their language. The thing is that in the state already, government makes use of disability rights NGOs in order to resource and all of that. So that representation that CG lacks is apparently already here. We claim that benefit for our side, okay? So what they actually need to defend is just that this lump sum of money in order to access private resources. We don't think that they show us that they get better representation under that. Listen, CG's case doesn't actually want stipends. They just want states to step up. And if the states are actually willing to step up and provide stipends, they can easily access this comparative instead by working with NGOs and providing all of these things that you won't be able to provide with a stipend. Why won't you be able to provide that with a stipend, okay? Because in order to garner these resources better, we think that you need to make use of economies of scales, okay? In order to make sure that you can have widespread access and that you have as much or actualized as possible, you need to be able to make use of tenders, because then the money is centralized. They don't have to give the money to per person, which clearly creates opportunity costs. Under our side, the tenders make sense because it costs less on large scales, but secondly, it can be negotiated down on a large scale. It's the same logic as buying in bulk, except for tenders, okay? On the comparative on their side, they include individual costs for individuals, okay? Think about the difference between like a travel scooter for every person or state transport that helps disabled people to get around. There's a much higher cost there, much higher margins. We don't think the stipend is any reason. We just think that these are not costs that the individual should principally have to hold, especially if they cannot reasonably meet their needs. These stipends won't allow them to. And we think at that point that harms their individual dignity. This takes closing government completely out of this debate because their only distinction was mechanism, and that mechanism has failed. Two more unique extensions to our case. Firstly, trading off state infrastructure for stipends harms disability visibility by skirting state burdens to it, which means that you harm the connection and the obligation to disabled people with their states, okay? Because firstly, obviously it goes against state burdens because it's not just an obligation case. The premise here is that liberal democracies would have, these are the states that would have disability provisions in this. They are outsourcing that to the individual and not working directly with like infrastructure like NGOs. Once the state to step up on their burden, we think that that's more reasonable than stipends, okay? And we haven't been given any reason why this would uniquely only affect disability. We don't allow states to skirt their burdens. But secondly, the issue with this is that it's skirting it directly to the individual. And here is the nuance here, because that becomes something that is personal and private that this individual then has to deal with beyond being able to deal with it with their community and with their state. State for disability rights now being met, okay? Whereas the stipend acts as a scapegoat for them to get. The trade-off that they don't seem to recognize is that you get less visibility because you have no campaign, you have no money towards research. See that these individuals exist, and number two, see that they're accepted by their state society. No, thank you. The comparative with the private is that we don't then associate disability rights with the state, and then therefore we don't challenge people's internalized discrimination. But and the logic here is social contact theory, okay? So even by OO's logic, our side actually better gets these corporations to individual in two ways. Number one, it frames them as outsiders, okay? That their personal issues are something that they need to deal with. And the issue here is that the most progressive form of disability movements is one that enables acceptance, okay? This is exactly what opening government is scared of, but they're the ones who are enabling it by shunning them and justifying that shunning from society, okay? Our most unique extension here is that this form of acceptance ought to be normalized, how to speak against your own body. If you're blind, that should need to be fixed because reasonably also many visible and invisible disabilities can never actualize, and society should better cater for them. We only are able to do that through more normalized state infrastructure. The state is the only individual that would be able to do that. In this debate so far, how do people actually claim welfare around invisible disabilities? They're going to have to deal with this stipend. Is you're already out of time and it's 6:30. This creates several issues. Number one, and deny the presence of mental health and invisible learning disabilities, even to some extent physical disabilities. So for people who cannot access a diagnosis, they're never going to be able to access this stipend. But secondly, we think for even people in progressive communities, they're unlikely to access a diagnosis because these things can be often incredibly difficult to diagnose. That's why comparatively, we would prefer that you just have open mental health talks and these resources just be available to anyone so that they don't have to prove that they need to be likely to have them. And then thirdly, we think that this harms the perception of these people who are visibly or explicitly disabled to a larger society because they're treated worse because they need to be able to prove their disability, and this creates some form of disability Olympics. Ultimately, you need to side with closing opposition.
Thanks, member of opposition government. We put in already. Yes, I can.
Sure, just okay. I pronounce she, her. I'll start my speech. I think Bukhosi's speech is extremely important, and I think his extension is able to ask why this is necessary in the first place, especially considering the analysis you get from Bukhosi as to how there's probably things like big philanthropy, things like the private sector will see a gap if the state leaves, they'll probably come into this space. There's probably things like churches, there's probably things like social justice movements. There's already enough to prove that these people will get services, and these services will be available at least at the end of the day. So it's unclear to us why the state needs to keep doing this, especially if the state can't ability. Well, we think that's fine. They aren't doing it well, so fine, give it up to someone that's going to do it better. If the best you can. The issue of transparency is important because we don't think it's fair to say that, probably think state is still going to abscond its responsibility if it wants to. It's even easier in your world because it's difficult to see if state is channeling money into these specific centers or into these specific homes, things you can actually tell because you can tell if there's money in your bank account, but you can't tell if state is like probably channeling money into the specific service. I think the issue on the narrative shift is important because it proves how we make lives better for these people at the end of the day. Because all shifting narrative in the fact that we can see that these individuals have capacity to make decisions, but the trickle-down effect it's likely to have in society and how they perceive these groups, giving them access to jobs, giving them access to spaces where they make policy and stuff like that is important because this debate is not just about like short-term benefits at the end of the day, but even the idea of like money versus services, which is important because these individuals are not only disabled, they're disabled and locked out of specific spaces, like they don't have the capacity to make money, they can't access the best education to just have the best skills for the best jobs. It's important for them to have this money, and we think it's fine if they choose to use this money for their like furtherance of their career or like furtherance of their family. We think they have the capacity to make these decisions at the end of the day. It's ridiculous for O to say that they don't. Responding to CO, firstly, they say it's important for us to reform the society around us. That's exactly what we do. Because we think that the point where you shift narrative and state is actually giving these people money because they have the capacity to make their own decisions, that narrative shift is significant in how society perceives these groups of people. Even if it's not immediate, we think state continuously doing this, people learning that state is doing this, we think the impact of that is likely to be much better. But secondly, this is not hinged on the stipends being feasible. We think this narrative shift doesn't mean you have to be giving them billions of dollars, just giving them money and actually showing that they have the capacity to do things. We think at the point where we're able to prove why OG's issue on dignity is important, we take that away from them. The second thing they talk about is the stipend doesn't that stipends aren't going to be sufficient and all of that. We think we already tell you that there's different alternatives already existing. They need to prove why those alternatives are not sufficient. We think at the point where a state leaves this particular sector, obviously there's a gap. Obviously the private sector comes in. Obviously things like big philanthropy that Bukhosi tells you about come in. Things like the church and like all these other services can still be provided. We think that's something that's still possible. The other thing they talk about is how the state is going to like announce its failure. We think that's fine. If the state is failing, let us know it's failing. But secondly, it's so much harder to tell if the state is failing in your world because all the state needs to do is build a center. We don't know if that center is catering for the like array of disabled people that exist. It's probably impossible. There's a lot of pressure on that one center. They probably don't even know every single disabled person that exists. We think the private sector is likely to people can invest in different strands of being disabled and stuff like that. We think it's far much easier for us to cater for the nuances that CEO is claiming are extremely important. The other thing they talk about is limited disabilities probably getting catered for and stuff like that. We think this is comparative. We think Bukhosi already tells you the reason why quality is bad for the state, and we think we also OG doesn't do this, is because the state has to then cater for this large array of different types of disabled people. We think at the point where we shift this burden from the state because an opportunity has come in for different entities to get in, but then we think it's easier for them to have the capacity to even cater for different groups of people, to even cater for nuance in a way that you're unlikely to do. We care about nuance, and we think we comparatively provide it better than you do. I'll take opening. Okay, I can't hear anything. I don't know if it's me.
Can closing go?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so because philanthropies exist, help the poor, what's your
The state
case?
is not letting go of its burden. It's giving money to these people because that's the best that state can do. Them taking up this data for all possible disabled people, they aren't even able to follow up on these sorts of things at the end of the day. If they're not able to provide that well, then they should do what they do well, denounce whatever they can to do to the private sector. Engaging opening. We think the issue on acceptance just makes zero sense to me, because it's unclear how the only way for disabled people to interact with people is through these specific homes or through these specific centers. We don't live in the 1800s. I think the level of interaction within status quo is like extremely huge, so things like social media, things like school, etc. It's unclear why this is the most important thing about having these specific centers existing. But secondly, we tell you the narrative shift is likely to make it even easier for these individuals to be accepted, but not just accepted for being like disabled, but accepted for having the capacity to make decisions on their own lives, and how that affects the job opportunities they get, and even their ability to get jobs, ability to access schools and stuff like that at the end of the day, the ability to be voted in and actually change things like policy and stuff like that. Because we tell you the problem is not that state is making decisions, right? Because that's what OG says. It's because state just doesn't have the capacity to make these decisions, because they don't have representation of these people in these spaces, because we don't see these people to have capacity to do things, and that's just how society sees them. That's why we believe we should create centers, because we're the ones that know what is good for them. We think it's comparatively easier for these people to be accepted, to get into places like policy and stuff like that. And at the point where we're able to prove that we still have better quality because there's alternative groups that can provide these services at the end of the day, we think that's great. We think if these people like choose how to spend their stipends and they choose not to spend it on like medical care, they probably don't need that medical care, and you're presuming that's what they need at the end of the day. But we think even the nuance and the different types of disabled people that exist is catered for better in our world, because there's different entities that can come into this industry and probably provide different services. That competition obviously means you have better quality, but it also means you have cheaper stuff. So like OO can't say like, oh, counseling is going to be expensive. There's many people like coming into this space at the end of the day. It's not enough to say that because we are providing something that's good, this thing needs to be of good quality and needs to cater for the most people. If state can't do that, we think it's fine if other people take up that responsibility. Proud to win from CG.
Thanks, Aka. We when you're ready. Yes, wait, let me just check. I think there's someone unmuted.
Yeah. So Alito Enoch, you are unmuted. Okay, thank you.
Easy.
I'll get started in 3, 2, 1. I think both government teams just need a debating 101 refresher, right? Because they can't just win by running the negative case of saying that states are bad. The burden on our bench is not to defend the quality of state services, but the burden uniquely on them is to show us why these state services can never be improved to the extent why we should completely outsource and shirk states' burden. Both government teams failed to do this. Because on our side, we are happy to use the same kinds of NGOs and like goodwill organizations that CG wants to talk about to hold governments accountable. On our side, we are happy to increase funding towards these community centers. We are happy to have more clinics, make them more accessible. In fact, that is the crux of our extension that goes unresponded to that Shannon tells you. What disability rights movement wants isn't for the disabled or the differently able to be ostracized to some corner of the world where they get like some money a month and be happy with that. It's for visibility, it is for acceptance, and it's for society to reform itself in such a way that all programs are uniquely best when provided by the state, because it means you can access things like your public university, enable you to buy, I don't know, some mobility aid that could help you do this. That is so offensive that you actually don't care about disabled people at that point. In this speech, I'm just going to show you why we win over all three teams, which isn't just like simple logic, but I'm going to summarize it first. Government bench does not engage on the comparative, right? Their case says states are bad and therefore we should outsource, without telling us why that outsourcing actually leads to any kind of mechanistically good reasons why the life and the quality of living for these individuals is improved. Opening opposition is mostly correct on some of the things that they run, but we also think they're a bit isolationist, right? They run things like exclusive centers for the disabled. They run things like functional discrimination. No, we tell you uniquely that disabled individuals are able and capable to be integrated into society, and that's what society needs to be pivoting towards. That is a unique extension that outweighs every single thing. Secondly, we just give you better mechanization for all of our claims. Like literally, government bench is saying, yes, they can get money. And sure, you don't need to tell us how much money they're going to get anyways, but like as a specific figure, but basic logic would dictate that you have economies of scale when the state is able to do things like build one clinic that can service 50 people with an invisible disability at once, as opposed to your side where you need to give each of these individuals like 50 different cash stipends so that they can go and access the private sector that is going to be exploitative and want to overcharge them. Like, I just don't know why this is something that is so unclear to both government teams. Okay, so let's go team by team. Why do we win? Starting with OG. I think OG just clearly loses this debate. They claim a principle on autonomy and dignity. The problem here is that autonomy and dignity is not gotten just by having money. Their principle is actually contingent on the outcome that they never mechanized, because they didn't need to prove that giving these people money actually gives them dignity. But they never showed us why that is the case. Because what we tell you from Shannon's speech is, for instance, if you need to purchase your own mobility aid in order to get around a city that does not have disability ramps, that is an increasing cost that you're placing on the individual, and you are burdening them, and you're not being society to accommodate for them. So they can't claim dignity and autonomy unless they're able to prove that they actually dignify these individuals, which, we asked them in several POIs, they say, no, that's not what this debate is about. So I think OG is just out. CG is at best derivative and at worst illogical. They tell us that states are able to do things like give this money and then outsource it to private NGOs and NGOs and private entities to do the rest. The problem here, again, is they never mechanize why it is that A, you have sufficient goodwill from NGOs and churches for them to actually have any meaningful difference in people's lives. Imagine the government telling a disabled person like, oh, I'm sorry, the society is not accessible for you, but this church should help you. This NGO should hopefully try to raise enough money and have people care about your issues. Uniquely, again, that whip speech does not respond to why it is that you need visibility as a prerequisite to even get NGOs to care about disability rights. So if they want to claim NGOs that we are and logically prior to them, because you need people to first care about this movement. You don't do that when you are isolated. They then come around and say, oh no, but accountability, right? We can't tell what the government is doing. I'm sorry, you can see if there are accessibility ramps or not around cities. If their issue is that you don't have people who are living with the disabilities and with the lived experience making these, people who are consulting on city and urban planning be people who are living with disabilities. That does not mean we have to go on this whole scale shirking of our state burden. Secondly, they say accountability, but I would posit it's easier to hold a state accountable when you can see the state of these services being dilapidated or poor, which is their best case scenario, versus on their side, because we can't know how much money is in people's bank accounts. That's their mechanism, right?
People in society only respect you if they see you making decisions for yourself with money, because insofar as they see these people being subjugated to less say and zero privacy in how they
so thank you. That's time. I don't think that's true. And if that was the case, I don't want to live in that society. But even if that is the case, I don't think the state should be enforcing that kind of society that is extremely discriminatory towards individuals. The role of the duty of the state to afford you that by giving you services. We don't tell poor people that are homeless that, here's money, go sort out your house. You're not listening. This also then deals with what Bukhosi tries to say, right? Even if they were, we think and they're not getting to the unique context of individuals. That is more of an argument for why states should be better, not an argument for why states should not be involved at all. Because on your side, you would like these individuals then roam the streets whilst high on drugs and not care for them. I don't think any of the teams on government bench really make sense, panel. Okay, let's distinguish ourselves from open opposition and show you why we clearly and comfortably take the first here. We think OO is perhaps correct in terms of pointing out some of the things as to why you need centers, right? But we think firstly, their rhetoric is incredibly isolationist in a way that's potentially damaging towards individuals living with disabilities, because they say you need and state and demanding states cater to your needs. But secondly, we think that also just does not engage charitably with granted weak government bench cases, but if you use this money to do things that you shouldn't, right? I think reasonably, we don't infantilize people living with disabilities and say that they like use their money well. Instead, we give you a structural reason that outweighs all of their impacts on why it is that states a priori have a responsibility and a duty to them. The OO is perhaps going to skate through this debate, but they clearly can't take the first. Panel, this debate requires us to engage on what makes the life for people living with disabilities better. It is not giving them a cash sum and expecting them to like deal with it. It is instead creating a society and reforming a society that is accepting and a society that actually listens and cares for them. For all of these reasons, CO takes the first.
Thanks, Okwip, and thanks to everyone to what was a great debate. Please just wait on the main odd for the results. I think we will be there in the next 30 minutes.